At 4:17 on a Thursday afternoon, my CEO fired me. He slid a white envelope across the conference table and tapped it twice. "You needed to remain employed through Monday's closing," he said. "Since you won't be, the transaction units disappear." Those units were worth $8.4 million. He expected anger, maybe tears. Instead, I opened the envelope, read the first page, and asked him one question. "Grant, when did the board vote to terminate me for cause?" His hand stopped moving. The general counsel looked down, and the woman from Human Resources quietly closed the folder in front of her. 36 hours later, the buyer froze management's $18 million rollover pool. By Monday morning, the executives who had fired me were begging my attorney to join an emergency call. They had remembered the closing date. They had forgotten page 11. My name is Tessa Rowan. For 9 years, I worked at Astorvale Systems, a logistics software company that helped hospitals and manufacturers predict supply interruptions before they became emergencies. When I joined, the enterprise division consisted of 4 people, 2 unfinished products, and a sales forecast nobody believed. By the time I was fired, my division had 63 employees, contracts in 14 states, and a $310 million customer backlog. I did not found Astorvale. I did not own a controlling share, but I had built the part of the company that made it attractive to buyers. 5 years earlier, when cash was tight and senior employees were leaving, the board had asked me to accept less salary in exchange for something called transaction units. They were simple in principle. If the company sold above a specified valuation, each unit would convert into cash. I had 210,000 of them. At the buyer's final price, they were worth $40 each, $8.4 million. More than I had earned during my entire career. And according to Grant Sloan, our CEO, all he had to do to erase them was fire me before the sale closed. He was wrong, but what made his mistake so expensive was not only the contract, it was the reason he wanted me gone. The buyer was Kestrel Harbor Group, a private technology company that had spent almost 6 months examining our financial statements, customer contracts, and security controls. Their offer valued Astorvale at $420 million. The founders would receive cash. Early investors would finally exit. Senior management would roll $18 million of their proceeds into the new company. That rollover mattered to Grant. He had spent years telling everyone that Astorvale was his life's work. But during the final month of negotiations, I began to understand that his real concern was not the company's future. It was his position after the sale. Kestrel Harbor had offered him an executive chairman title, a new employment agreement, and a significant ownership stake. Our CFO, Mara Vance, would become regional finance director. Both of them needed the deal to close, and they needed the final numbers to look clean. My transaction units were already included in the company's capitalization model. Everyone knew they existed. But $8.4 million is an abstract number when a sale is years away. It becomes painfully real when the wire instructions are being prepared. 3 weeks before closing, Mara asked whether I would exchange my units for a smaller cash payment and shares in the buyer. "How much smaller?" I asked. She smiled. $3 million in cash, $2 million in restricted shares. Restricted for how long? 4 years? I did not reject the offer rudely. I simply told her I preferred the agreement the company had already signed. Her smile disappeared. That was the first warning. The second warning came 9 days before closing. My assistant received a request from Information Technology asking for a list of every system I administered. That was not unusual during an acquisition. The wording was, the request asked for business continuity access in the event of sudden leadership unavailability. I sent the list. Then I forwarded the request to my personal attorney, Nina Calder, with one sentence. "This may be routine, but I want a date-stamped record." I did not send company files. I did not download confidential material. I preserved only my own compensation agreement, pay records, and correspondence that the company had previously given me for my personal records. The third warning came 2 days later. Grant removed me from a call with our largest hospital customer. When I asked why, he said the buyer wanted a smaller group. The buyer's integration director called me 20 minutes later. Tessa, are you joining? I was told you requested a smaller group. There was a pause. We did not request that. That evening, I wrote down the date, time, and exact words. Not because I was planning revenge, because memory becomes strangely unreliable when millions of dollars are involved. By Wednesday, I had been removed from 3 closing meetings. My calendar was suddenly clear. My responsibilities were being reassigned, and Human Resources scheduled a leadership alignment discussion for 4 o'clock Thursday afternoon. Nina called me at lunch. Take your own pen, she said. Read everything. Sign only to acknowledge receipt. Do not argue facts in the room. Do you think they're firing me? I think you should behave as though every sentence may be repeated later. That advice saved me from making the only mistake they were prepared to use against me. Grant was already seated when I entered the conference room. Mara sat to his right. Daniel Kerr, our general counsel, sat beside her. Across from them was Bianca Frost from Human Resources. 4 people, 1 envelope, no board member. Grant did not ask me to sit. Tessa, we've completed a review of your recent conduct, he began. We've lost confidence in your judgment. What conduct? Daniel answered. You made an unauthorized pricing concession to the Fairmont Hospital Network, and your 4th quarter forecast materially overstated expected revenue. Both accusations were false. The pricing concession had been approved by Grant in writing. The forecast used figures supplied by Mara's finance team. But Nina had told me not to litigate facts in the room, so I asked a different question. Is the company terminating me for cause? As that term is defined in my executive agreement? Grant leaned back. Yes? Was a board resolution adopted? Bianca looked at Daniel. Daniel said, the company has authority to terminate your employment. Wasn't my question. Grant pushed the envelope toward me. This isn't a negotiation. I opened it. The letter said my employment was terminated immediately for material failure to perform assigned duties. It said my salary would stop that day. My medical coverage would continue through the end of the month. And because I had not remained employed through the transaction closing, all unvested units were forfeited. That was when I asked, when did the board vote to terminate me for cause? Nobody answered. My agreement did not allow Grant to invent cause by saying the word. For a performance-based allegation, it required 3 things: a written notice describing the failure, a formal determination by the board, and 30 days to cure the problem. I had received none of them. Bianca eventually said, Tessa, this isn't a courtroom. No, I replied. It's a contract. Grant's face tightened. You can leave your laptop and badge. I signed the acknowledgement line. Not the release. Not the statement that I agreed with their allegations. Only the line confirming that I had received the letter. Then I placed the company laptop on the table, removed my access card, and walked out. No shouting, no security scene, no dramatic speech. They had prepared for emotion. They had not prepared for procedure. I called Nina from the parking lot. They used cause, I said. What procedure did they follow? None that I saw. And the closing? Monday. Send me the termination letter. I photographed it using my personal phone and sent it from the parking lot. Nina called back 11 minutes later. Her first words were not congratulations. They were a warning. Do not contact the buyer. Do not contact employees. Do not log into anything. Do not ask anyone to send you company documents. I understand. Now open your agreement. I kept a paper copy at home. The agreement was 26 pages long. Most people would have focused on the provision stating that the units vested when the transaction closed. Grant had focused on it too. But page 11 contained Section 7-, a qualifying pre-change termination. The section said that if the company terminated me without contractual kasig, because during the 90-day period following a potential change in control event, my transaction units would remain outstanding until the earlier of 2 dates, 90 days after termination, or the transaction closing. The board had signed an exclusive acquisition letter 61 days earlier. That was the potential change in control event. Because they had not followed the cause procedure, the agreement treated my termination as one without cause. And because Monday's closing was less than 90 days away, the units had not disappeared. They were still alive. There was more. Section 11 required any successor company to assume the agreement. Section 14 required Astor Vale to reimburse reasonable enforcement costs if I substantially prevailed. Grant had tried to save $8.4 million by firing me 36 hours before closing. Instead, he had activated every protection the board had given me 5 years earlier. But Nina was careful. "A contract is not self-enforcing," she said. "They may still fight. What do? We give everyone an opportunity to make the correct decision before the closing." That distinction mattered. We were not threatening to destroy the transaction. We were giving the company a chance to disclose an obligation it had tried to erase. At 7:06 Friday morning, Nina sent a 5-page letter to Astor Vale's general counsel. It contained no insults, no accusations of fraud, no demand for an immediate wire. It identified the relevant sections of my agreement and requested 5 things: confirmation that my transaction units remained outstanding, preservation of board records concerning my termination, preservation of communications discussing my payout, confirmation that the compensation obligation had been disclosed to the buyer, and assurance that no one would alter the stated reason for my termination after the fact. At 7:41, Daniel replied. His response was 4 sentences. The company rejected our interpretation. My termination was for cause. My units were forfeited. The matter was closed. At 8:10, Nina's phone rang. It was not Daniel. It was outside counsel for Kestrel Harbor. They had received a copy of the letter from Astor Vale because the merger agreement required the seller to disclose any claim that could affect the transaction. The buyer's lawyer asked one question. Was Miss Rowan's agreement listed on the transaction payment schedule? Nina said she could not answer for the company. At 8:32, my former assistant texted me, "Everyone has been pulled into a board call." I did not respond. At 9:15, Grant called my personal number. I let it ring. At 9:17, he called again. Then Mara. Then Bianca. By 10 o'clock, I had 14 missed calls. The same people who had disabled my badge the previous afternoon suddenly needed to discuss a misunderstanding. But the problem was no longer just $8.4 million. The buyer had found an omission. At 10:40, Daniel sent Nina a second letter. This one was 12 pages. It claimed the board had confirmed and ratified the cause determination during an emergency meeting that morning. Nina read the phrase twice. Then she called me. They are attempting to fix the procedure after termination. Can they? They can argue it. Our agreement says the determination and notice must occur before a cause termination becomes effective. More importantly, their letter creates a timeline. The timeline was simple. Thursday at 4:17, they terminated me immediately. Friday morning, after receiving our letter, they held the board meeting that supposedly justified Thursday's decision. Even if every accusation had been true, their own documents showed that the required determination had not existed when they fired me. Then the buyer asked for the underlying evidence. That was when the second part of their story began to collapse. The Fairmont pricing concession was not unauthorized. Grant had approved it in an email 6 weeks earlier. Proceed at the revised rate. Closing this account strengthens the buyer narrative. The revenue forecast was not mine alone. Finance had prepared the numbers. Mara had approved the final presentation. Their evidence did not show misconduct. It showed that they had selected 2 ordinary business decisions and renamed them after deciding to remove me. At 11:30, the buyer suspended the closing checklist, not the acquisition, the checklist. That difference kept the pressure focused exactly where it belonged. Kestrel Harbor still wanted the company. It simply refused to accept responsibility for an undisclosed compensation dispute without adjusting the deal. At 12:18, the buyer's diligence team found a folder in the company's transaction workspace. The folder had been uploaded by Mara's finance department. Its name was Project Clear Table. Inside was a presentation prepared 2 weeks earlier. Slide 1 listed closing leakage, legal fees, bank fees, retention payments, transaction bonuses, and my units. Beside my name was a red figure, $8.4 million. The next slide contained 3 options: renegotiate, defer, or eliminate through pre-close separation. They had not fired me because of a pricing decision. They had planned a pre-closing separation because they believed employment on the closing date controlled the payout. They had read the first trigger. They had missed the protection period. The presentation did not prove that every person in the company supported the plan. It did prove that avoiding my payment had been considered before the accusations against me appeared. The buyer sent the presentation to Astor Vale's board chair, Evelyn Shaw. Evelyn had signed my original agreement 5 years earlier. She called Grant and asked whether he had shown the full contract to the team that prepared Project Clear Table. According to what Nina later told me, Grant said outside counsel had reviewed the plan. Outside counsel immediately denied approving my termination. Mara said Daniel had confirmed the units would disappear. Daniel said he had been told the board had already authorized the action. Bianca said she had relied on Daniel. Within 1 hour, 4 senior executives had produced 4 incompatible explanations. The board stopped asking whether I deserved $8.4 million. They began asking who had placed the transaction at risk. Kestrel Harbor delivered its position at 2:05 Friday afternoon. The buyer would still close on Monday under 3 conditions. First, Astor Vale had to acknowledge that my transaction units remained outstanding pending resolution. Second, $12 million of the seller's proceeds would be placed into a special escrow covering my claim, legal expenses, and related exposure. Third, the $18 million management rollover pool would be reduced to $7 million. That third condition destroyed the plan. Grant and Mara had tried to eliminate my payout to protect their own post-closing economics. Now the buyer was taking the money directly from the pool intended for them. Grant's projected rollover fell by more than half. Mara's fell even further. Other executives who had not participated in the decision were furious. At 2:21, Grant called again. At 2:22, he left a voicemail. "Tessa, we should resolve this directly. There are misunderstandings on both sides." There were not misunderstandings on both sides. One side had a signed agreement. The other had a PowerPoint titled, "Eliminate through pre-close separation." Still, Nina advised me not to make the conversation personal. "What outcome do you want?" she asked. "The agreement honored. Anything else?" "A neutral reference, correction of the cause designation, and no retaliation against my team. You understand you cannot control every employment decision after the acquisition." "I know. I want the company to agree that nobody will be punished for providing truthful information. That is reasonable. I did not demand Grant's resignation. I did not demand Mara's termination. Their positions were matters for the board and buyer. My claim was about what they owed me. That boundary kept my case strong. At 4 o'clock Friday afternoon, exactly 24 hours after my firing, the board convened again. This time, Kestrel Harbor's chief legal officer attended. Nina attended for me. I did not. That surprised Grant. He had expected a confrontation. Instead, he faced lawyers, directors, and the company's own records. Nina presented 4 points. 1. The exclusivity letter had triggered the contractual potential change period. 2. My termination occurred within that period. 3. The company had not completed the required cause procedure before terminating me. 4. The units therefore remained outstanding through closing. Daniel argued that the board's Friday ratification cured the defect. Nina responded that the contract made the procedure a condition of a cause termination, not paperwork that could be added after employment had already ended. The buyer's lawyer then asked Daniel whether Astor Vale had disclosed Project Clear Table before signing the merger agreement. Daniel said no. The board chair asked why. Nobody answered. Evelyn finally spoke. "We are not losing this transaction because management attempted to rewrite an agreement after the fact. The board voted on 3 resolutions. My termination designation was changed from cause to without cause. The company acknowledged that my units remained outstanding. Grant was removed from all closing-related decisions pending an independent review. Mara was instructed to preserve her records and step away from the payout calculations. At 5:38, Nina called me. "The units are alive," she said. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the wall. For 9 years, I had imagined what receiving that payout might feel like. I thought it would feel triumphant. It did not. It felt quiet, like finally putting down something heavy after carrying it so long that you had forgotten it was there. The deal closed at 9:04 Monday morning. Because the transaction occurred within the contractual window, all 210,000 units converted at $40 each, $8.4 million. My agreement also provided 12 months of salary and target bonus following a qualifying termination. That added $630,000. The company agreed to reimburse documented legal expenses under the enforcement provision. Tax counsel separately reviewed the transaction payment and applicable withholding. The settlement documents made no promise that the money was tax-free. It was compensation, and it would be reported appropriately. The final pre-tax value was slightly above $9 million. In exchange, I released the contractual claims after the payment protections were finalized. The company withdrew every suggestion that I had engaged in misconduct. My personnel record reflected termination without cause. The written settlement prohibited retaliation against employees who had cooperated truthfully with the board review. Grant remained employed only long enough to assist with an orderly transition. Kestrel Harbor did not appoint him executive chairman. Mara resigned during the investigation. Daniel stayed for several months and then left after the integration. Bianca kept her position because the board concluded she had followed legal instructions rather than designed the plan. That mattered to me. Accountability should follow evidence. Not proximity, not anger, evidence. 3 months later, I started Rowan Commercial Advisory. My first client was not a competitor of Astor Vale. It was a medical equipment company struggling to build an enterprise sales team without burning out the people doing the work. I hired 2 former colleagues after their integration roles ended naturally. Nobody stole customers. Nobody carried away confidential information. We built something new. The $8.4 million changed my financial life. But the most valuable part of the settlement was not the amount. It was the correction. For one night, Astor Vale's official record said I had failed the company. By Monday, the record showed what had actually happened. The company had failed to follow its own agreement. That distinction protected the career I had spent 9 years building. Grant believed the closing date was a finish line. He thought that if he removed me before I crossed it, everything I had earned would vanish. But contracts are written for the moment when confidence disappears and incentives change. The clause on page 11 did not reward revenge. It prevented avoidance. They fired me 36 hours before my biggest payout. They expected the timing to erase $8.4 million. Instead, the firing activated the protection, exposed their plan, and reduced the very rollover pool they had been trying to protect. They did not lose because I shouted louder. They lost because their documents contradicted their story. So let me ask you this. When Grant claimed the termination was for cause, would you have challenged him in that room? Or stayed quiet and let the contract answer for you? Tell me in the comments. And subscribe for more stories where patience, documentation, and lawful accountability change the balance of power.